Hi kids, welcome to Miss Nancy's Bible College for Kids. Today's lesson is in the Old Testament in the book of Esther, and it's called A New Queen Chosen. I love this story. I hope you all do too. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus which reigned from India into even Ethiopia, over 127 provinces, big place. In those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. So it was in front of all these royals. When he shewed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180. So he had a big feast for 180 days, which is a half a year, guys. And when these days were expired, after the 180 days of a feast, the king made a feast unto all the people that was present in Shushan the palace, both unto the great and the small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And here's how it was decorated up. I love this. Where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple, to silver rings and pillars of marble. I can just picture this. The beds were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble. Man, I'd like to have been there. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another. Now I found this very interesting. Does this mean that gold wasn't all one set, or just that it was different sizes or something? I'm not sure, but I like to think it was different ones. And royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. Now listen, this, guys, I find this great too. And the drinking was according to the law. Now, I'm not sure what the law was. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, here's somebody else that has a feast. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass. I'm not even going to ask you those names again, but they were the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king. And here's what they were going to serve him by doing. To bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal. I hope you guys are really thinking about this and what a thing it would be to see. And here's why he was going to have them to bring her. To shew the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. But the queen Vashti refused to come to the king. I like doing that because she shouldn't have done that. To the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. I can only imagine how embarrassing that would be. Then the king said to the wise men which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. So he's going to the people to get some advice, the men. And the next unto him was Carshena, Shether, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat in first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti, according to the law, because she had not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done this wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the people that are in the provinces, of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen shall come abroad unto all the women. I say this is really what they were all worried about. So that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she came not. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say this day unto all the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen, thus shall there arise too much contempt and wrath. They didn't want the women mad. If it please the king, let there go out a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and Medes, that it be not altered. Those laws could not be altered. And here's what the law was they wanted to send out. That Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. And the same pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces. Remember, there was 127. Into every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of the people, of every people. That makes sense. They have to be able to read it in their own language to understand it. But after these things, when the wrath of the king Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti. She was beautiful and fair to look upon, but anyway, and what she had done and what was decreed against her. So he'd had time to be mad, then he'd had time to get over it, then they'd had time to make a plan. Then said the king's servants, here comes part B of the plan. Then said the king's servants that ministered to him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, into the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women. And let their things for purification be given them. And let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. They wanted him to choose another royal. And the thing pleased the king, and he did so. I want to go back and tell you the name. I'm not sure if I did, but it's another queen chosen. So he did so. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish of Benjamin. Tells you all about his background, his lineage. Who had been carried away, this tells you some more about this man, this Jew named Mordecai, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. So he got carried away during that time, and he was in captivity. He brought Hadassah, that is Esther, so Esther is his niece, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her the things for purification, with such thing as belonged to her, and 7 maidens. So man, she had a maid already, which were meet to be given her out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maids to the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. Of course he did. He was like her dad. Now when every maid's turn was come to go into King Ahasuerus, after that she'd been there 12 months, she had to wait a year according to the manner of women, and here's why. For so were the days of their purification accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given to her with her out of the house of the women unto the king's house. So whatever any of these maidens come up and asked for, it was given her. And even Esther gave 7 maidens, but she didn't want nothing else. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Shazgaz. Love that name. The king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. This was like the girlfriends of the king. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she was called by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go into the king, she required nothing. Miss Nancy got ahead of herself, didn't she? She required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month. And over there that would be the month of January, which is the month, and its name is called Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So, kids, guess what happened? So that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So I wanted to call this a dream come true. But Esther probably hadn't dreamed about this. But in nowadays, we would think, oh man, this is like a dream come true. But this ain't all the story. I get ahead of myself sometimes. Let's go ahead with the questions and answers. Who was the king in this story? Ahasuerus. How many provinces was his kingdom? 127 provinces. And where was the king's throne? It was in a palace. What was the name of the palace? Shushan. You should know that because I've said it 50 times. But what did the king do in the 3rd year of his reign that started all this story? He had a feast, didn't he? Who all was in attendance in this? Who all came? All the princes and the servants and the nobles. And how long did the feast last? Remember? 180 days, a half a year. Then what happened? He had another feast, didn't he? Who was it for? For all the people, poor and the rich. And how long did it last at the king's palace? 7 days, just for a week. How was it decorated, the outside courts? I can just close my eyes and imagine. It was decorated with hangings of white and green and blue and cords of fine linen in the color of purple. Purple's like royalty. And it had silver rings and pillars of marble and beds. What were the beds made out of? Gold and silver. And then the pavement, I'm not too sure about that. I guess like a concrete floor, was red and blue and white and black marble. Oh my goodness. That would be beautiful, wouldn't it? What did they drink out of at this feast? Vessels of gold. And what were they filled with? Wine. And the funny thing is that they could drink in these according to what? the officers of the law that was there. Miss Nancy don't even know about that. It's kind of funny. Who else had had a feast during this time? Queen Vashti, didn't she? Who did she have a feast for? The women of the royal house of King Ahasuerus. And what happened the seventh day when the king's heart was merry at his feast? He sent 7 chamberlains, and no, we're not going to go over their names. And what did he send them to do? To go bring Queen Vashti to him before him and all of his people. And why did he want Queen Vashti brought? He wanted them, the 7 chamberlains, to put the royal crown on her head and come and bring her and show off her beauty. She was beautiful and fair, it says. What'd the queen say? And we don't know how she said it, but what'd she say? No, I ain't going. She refused to go, didn't she? Oh my, the 7 chamberlain come back and reported to the king, and how did he feel? He was wroth, and he was very mad. He was burning with anger, the Bible says. Who'd the king go to then? His wise men and counselors, the men that knew the days and the times. Why did he go to them? He said, boys, what am I going to do? And told what Queen Vashti had done, that she did not perform the commandment of the king. Well, you and I have talked about that. I said, if a king tells you to do something, off with your head if he wants to. So that could have happened to Vashti. I guess she got off pretty good, actually. But anyway, then a man named Memucan, he answered the king before the king and the princess. And he said, Queen Vashti did not only dishonor the king, he did all the princes and all the people. What do you think Memucan was really worried about? He didn't want all the women mad, did he? Women mad is not a good thing, but, Anyway, he didn't want them all to hear and for them to respond, because he was afraid that they would what? That they would despise their husbands and have contempt and wrath for them, and that they would follow Queen Vashti and do the same thing. So, what was his idea? He said, if it please thee, O king, send out a royal commandment, a law of the Medes and Persians. He wanted it made law, not just a letter, and that could not be changed. Into all the how many provinces? 127 provinces. And he said, you make it a law and send it out. And what was that law going to be, guys? That Queen Vashti could no more come before the king Ahasuerus. And, O king, give her estate to another, and it would be great. And so then all the wives would honor their husbands. I wonder if old Memucan was talking about the king or himself and the others. We'll never know. I'd say it was all of the above, wouldn't you? Did it please the king? Yes, it did. So he sent out the letters to how many provinces? All 127. And what was special that was said about these letters? They were in the languages of the people that lived in these provinces. So it had to be different languages. And part B, they come up with another plan. What was they going to do? They were going to look for fair young virgins, seeking them for the king. And then they were to appoint officers where? In each province, so that they could look for the fair young virgins. But anyway, what was to be done to the one that pleased the king the most? She was to be the royal queen in place of Queen Vashti. Who was the Jew mentioned in this story that was in Shushan the palace? Mordecai. What's something else that this story tells us about the Jew Mordecai? He'd been taken in captivity, hadn't he, by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Who did Mordecai bring up? His niece, which was Esther. And why did he bring her? Because it was like she was his daughter, because when her parents died, he took her in and raised her. And she was beautiful and fair to look upon. When many fair maidens gathered to Shushan the palace, and Esther was brought to Haggai, the keeper of the women, how did he feel about her? She pleased him, and he showed her and her maidens to where? To the best part of the place for the women to be kept. And how many maidens did he give Esther? He gave her 7, didn't he? And what hadn't Esther showed or told about herself or her people? She did not tell who she was from. And why did she say that or not say it, I guess? Because Mordecai told her, said, don't tell him your lineage or whose tribe or troop you come from. Now, after the second house for women, if the king did not call for the young virgins by name, what happened to them? They just didn't come back no more. How did Esther fare? She obtained favor to the second guy, didn't she? And then of everybody that saw her, they just thought she was so kind and so nice. So what month did Esther go before the king? The 10th month, which is January here. And this was in what year of his reign? The 7th year. How did the king feel about Esther? The king loved her above all the maidens throughout the land. And what did he do for her? He set the royal crown upon her head, and she became queen in the stead of Queen Vashti. Guys, I hope you like this story, and I am thinking in my heart that we might finish this thing. It's got some ups and downs in it, but it's a wonderful story. Thanks for listening in. I'll see you next time. Bye, kids.